Welcome back to the Great Indian AI Podcast channel, listeners. Today, we're going to be embarking on a pretty fascinating journey. We're going to be exploring a text that's not just revered, but actually recited by millions every single day. We're diving deep into Al-Fatiha,
The opening chapter of the Qur'an.
the opening chapter of the Quran. If you've ever wondered about the heartbeat of Islamic prayer or the power packed into just 7 verses,
Stick with us.
stick it with us. We'll uncover its layers of meaning, its significance in Islamic tradition,
And why it's so much more than just a prayer.
and why it's so much more than just a prayer.
You know, it's incredible how Al-Fatiha acts as a bridge between the earthly and the divine. It's a conversation, a dialogue between humanity and God. It's woven into the very fabric of Islamic life.
That's such a beautiful way to put it. And I think that's what makes this deep dive so compelling for our listeners on the Great Indian AI Podcast channel. We're not just looking at words on a page. We're exploring a living, breathing text that resonates deeply with millions around the world.
Absolutely. And the fact that Al-Fatiha has so many names.
Right.
The key, mother of the book, the cure, speaks volumes about its depth and the various ways it's understood and cherished. By the end of this episode, you'll have a whole new perspective on this short but incredibly powerful chapter.
I'm excited to get started. So before we delve into the verses themselves, let's set the stage a bit. I know there's some discussion about the origins of Al-Fatiha.
Yeah,
Was it revealed in Mecca or Medina?
that's a great question, and you've hit upon a point of debate among scholars. While the precise location is debated, what's widely accepted is that Al-Fatiha was the first complete chapter revealed to the Prophet Muhammad.
So it really lays the foundation for the entire Quran.
It does.
That's fascinating. And the name itself, Al-Fatiha, must hold a deeper meaning, right? It's not just a random label.
You're absolutely right. Al-Fatiha translates to the opener, or the key, reflecting its function as an opening prayer. The word originates from the Arabic root FTH, which implies actions like opening, explaining, disclosing, and even conquering. You can see how these meanings tie into Al-Fatiha's role.
Yeah.
It opens the Quran, it opens our prayers, and it's believed to unlock spiritual understanding.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like the name itself primes us for the journey we're about to take through the chapter.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's step into those verses now. Al-Fatiha has 7 verses, and I've heard they're structured in a very deliberate way.
That's right. The chapter is beautifully divided, with the first 3 verses often understood as God's words, focusing on praise and his attributes.
And the last 3 verses are those considered the servant's response.
Precisely. It creates a beautiful dialogue, a flow of communication between the creator and creation. It begins with acknowledging and praising God, and then transitions to the servant's plea, their expression of need, and seeking guidance.
I'm really starting to see why this chapter is so central to Islamic practice. It's like a microcosm of the relationship between humanity and God.
Exactly, and that relationship unfolds beautifully within the verses themselves. Take, for instance, the very first verse. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, most merciful. This phrase, known as the basmala, sets the tone for the entire chapter,
Wow.
and even the Quran itself.
So right from the start, it's invoking God's mercy and compassion. It's like setting the stage for a conversation rooted in those divine qualities.
It is. And then it moves on to praising God as Lord of the worlds in the second verse. This emphasizes God's dominion over all of creation, not just humanity, but everything that exists.
I'm noticing how these first few verses really establish God's power and majesty. Then we come to the third verse, and it's interesting how it repeats those attributes: most compassionate, most merciful, but then adds a new title, owner of the day of judgment. What's the significance of that shift?
That's a really insightful observation. It's not just a repetition, it's a crucial transition. It highlights that God's compassion and mercy, while encompassing, are not without limits. There's a day of reckoning where justice will be served. It's like the chapter is reminding us that divine attributes are multifaceted, encompassing both boundless mercy and perfect justice.
It's a really nuanced understanding, and I can see how it adds depth to the way we understand God's nature. And that brings us to the servant's half of the chapter, starting with that powerful statement in verse 5. You we worship, and you we ask for help. It's like a declaration of dependence and a turning point in the dialogue.
That's a great way to put it. This verse is the core message of Al-Fatiha. It's a powerful affirmation of monotheism, declaring that worship and seeking help belong solely to God, rejecting any other form of idolatry or reliance on anything other than the divine.
It's a stark and powerful statement of faith, isn't it? And then the servant asks for guidance. Verse 6 expresses that need so beautifully. Guide us to the straight path. What's the significance of that path?
This isn't just any path. It's the path that leads to God's favor and righteousness. It's about aligning our lives with divine will, seeking that which is good and pleasing to God.
So it's about more than just asking for directions. It's about seeking a way of life that's in harmony with divine principles.
Yes.
And that leads us to the final and perhaps most discussed verse. The path of those you have favored, not those you are angry with or those who are astray. Now, this is where interpretations get complex, right? Who are these groups being referred to?
You're right, this verse has generated much discussion and interpretation. However, many commentators, particularly in the early period, refrain from explicitly identifying these groups. They emphasize that this is a general plea for guidance to be on the right side, the side of God's favor, and to avoid the paths that lead to divine displeasure and misguidance.
That makes sense. It's like a prayer to be guided towards righteousness and away from anything that might lead one astray. But I'm curious, haven't there been more specific interpretations as well?
Yes, as theological discussions evolved, some commentators, particularly in later periods, offered interpretations linking those who are angry with to the Jews and those who are astray to the Christian.
I see. So one way to understand it is that it's referencing those who might have had knowledge but rejected it,
Right.
versus those who are perhaps misled due to a lack of complete knowledge.
That's one way to look at it. However, it's crucial to remember that these are just interpretations. The Qur'an itself doesn't explicitly name any group. It's important to note that this verse, like many others in the Qur'an, invites us to ponder, to delve deeper, and to recognize the complexities of interpreting scripture. It's a reminder that the Qur'an offers multiple layers of meaning, and engaging with different interpretations can enrich our understanding.
That's a really important point. And it seems to be in line with the spirit of the great Indian AI podcast channel. We're all about exploring different perspectives and encouraging our listeners to think critically. So having laid this groundwork, I'm really curious to explore how Al-Fatiha transcends its roles of prayer and becomes a source of spiritual benefit in Islamic tradition. But before we dive into that, we'd like to take a quick moment to thank our listeners for tuning in to the Great Indian AI podcast channel. We appreciate your support, and we'll be back right after a short message. Welcome back to the Great Indian AI podcast channel. Before the break, we were about to delve into the benefits and virtues attributed to Al-Fatiha, a dimension that adds another layer of intrigue to this already fascinating chapter. It's amazing how much depth we've uncovered in just 7 verses. We've discussed its role as an opening prayer and the dialogue it establishes between humanity and God, but it seems there's even more to explore.
You're absolutely right. Within Islamic scholarship, there's a concept called fatcheril, which refers to the virtues or merits associated with certain actions, verses, or chapters of the Quran.
So it's like recognizing the special significance of certain parts of the scripture based on their content or the context in which they were revealed.
Exactly. And these virtues are often discussed in hadith,
Okay.
the sayings and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, it's important to note that the acceptance and interpretation of hadith can vary between different schools of thought within Islam, such as the Sunni and Shia traditions.
That's helpful context.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Al-Fatiha, both Sunni and Shia Muslims seem to agree on its elevated status, right?
Absolutely. It's universally recognized as one of the greatest chapters in the Quran. And this is where those other names we mentioned earlier, Mother of the Book, the Cure, really come into play.
Okay, let's unpack those names. Mother of the book, I can grasp that to some extent. It's the opening chapter, the foundation, so it's like the mother of everything that follows.
That's a great way to understand it. The term al-Kitab, Mother of the Book, points to its encompassing nature. It encapsulates the essence of the Quran's message. The oneness of God, his attributes, the need for guidance, the day of judgment, it's all there.
But the Q, that's the one that really piques my curiosity. What does that imply about Al-Fatiha?
This is where we see Al-Fatiha's perceived spiritual power. There's a belief within Islamic tradition that reciting Al-Fatiha can have a healing effect, both spiritually and even physically.
So it's not just words on a page. It's believed to have an active, almost tangible impact on the reciter.
Yes, and this belief stems from the idea that the Quran itself is a source of healing and guidance. Al-Fatiha, being the opening chapter, is seen as embodying that healing power in a concentrated form.
It's like accessing the core energy of the Quran through this one chapter.
Right.
Are there any specific examples of how this healing is believed to work?
There are many narrations within Islamic tradition about the benefits of reciting Al-Fatiha. For example, some believe it can protect against evil, ward off negative energy, and even alleviate physical ailments.
Wow, that's fascinating. It really elevates this chapter beyond just a prayer to something that can have a profound impact on an individual's well-being. Are there any specific stories or examples that illustrate this belief?
There are numerous stories and anecdotes passed down through generations. While their authenticity is subject to scholarly debate, they highlight the deep-seated belief in the power of Al-Fatiha. One common narrative revolves around using Al-Fatiha as a form of spiritual healing. People would recite it over water or food, believing it would imbue those elements with healing properties.
So it's almost like a form of prayer or blessing, invoking divine mercy and healing through the words of Al-Fatiha.
Exactly. And this practice wasn't limited to individuals. Some historical accounts mention the use of Al-Fatiha for healing on a larger scale, such as during times of plague or hardship.
It speaks to the deep faith and reliance people placed in the power of this chapter. But beyond the physical aspect, how is Al-Fatiha understood to offer spiritual healing?
The spiritual healing aspect is often linked to the chapter's emphasis on seeking guidance and submitting to God's will. Remember the verse, "Guide us to the straight path."
Right.
This plea for guidance is seen as a way to align oneself with divine will, which in turn brings about inner peace and spiritual well-being.
It's like the act of reciting Al-Fatiha and internalizing its message helps to realign our compass, guiding us back to a state of spiritual harmony.
Precisely. And that state of harmony is seen as essential for overall well-being. It's believed that when we're aligned with divine will, we're less susceptible to negative spiritual influences and more capable of navigating life's challenges.
So Al-Fatiha isn't just about reciting words. It's about cultivating a state of being, a way of living in accordance with divine principles. And that in itself can be incredibly healing.
That's a beautiful way to summarize it. And it's this depth of meaning, this multifaceted nature that makes Al-Fatiha so much more than just a prayer. It's a source of solace, guidance, and yes, even healing for those who turn to it with sincerity and understanding.
I think what's truly remarkable is how these 7 verses can hold so much meaning and significance for so many people across the globe. It's a testament to the power of faith and the enduring legacy of the Qur'an.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that even the shortest texts can hold profound wisdom if we're willing to delve deeper and explore their multiple layers of meaning.
Speaking of exploring, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Al-Fatiha. Let's take a moment to recap what we've learned so far, and then see if we can tie it all together.
That sounds like a great plan. I think it's important to synthesize the information we've discussed so far so that our listeners on the Great Indian AI podcast channel can walk away with a cohesive understanding of this incredible chapter.
Welcome back to the Great Indian AI podcast channel. We've spent this episode unpacking the layers of meaning within Al-Fatiha, from its historical context to its profound spiritual significance. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And you know what strikes me most is how Al-Fatiha, despite its brevity, offers a glimpse into the very heart of Islam. We've touched on its role as a pillar of prayer, its structure as a dialogue between humanity and God,
Right.
and the virtues attributed to its recitation. It's like a microcosm of the faith itself.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and I think it's that multidimensional aspect that makes Al-Fatiha so endlessly fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not just a prayer, it's a declaration of faith, a source of comfort, a guidepost for living, and for many, a source of healing.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to encourage our listeners on the Great Indian AI podcast channel to think about how understanding the meaning and context of Al-Fatiha can enrich their own experience. It's one thing to recite the words,
Right.
but it's another to truly grasp their significance and allow them to resonate within.
I couldn't agree more. I remember the first time I really paused to reflect on the meaning of Al-Fatiha. It was like I was hearing it with new ears, and it added a whole new dimension to my prayer.
Right.
It became more than just words. It became a heartfelt conversation, a moment of true connection.
That's such a powerful experience, and I think it highlights the transformative potential of engaging with sacred texts on a deeper level.
Yeah.
It's not just about intellectual understanding. It's about letting those words touch your heart and form your life.
So what are some takeaways our listeners can carry with them from this deep dive? What's the essence of Al-Fatiha that we can integrate into our lives, even beyond the context of prayer?
That's a great question. I think one key takeaway is the importance of recognizing God's attributes. Al-Fatiha reminds us of his power, his
Mm.
compassion,
Mm.
his mercy, and his justice. Reflecting on these attributes can help us cultivate a deeper understanding of God and our relationship with him.
And that understanding can ripple outwards, influencing how we interact with the world around us,
Absolutely.
how we treat others, and how we approach life's challenges.
Exactly. It's about embodying those divine qualities in our own lives.
Right.
Striving to be more compassionate, more merciful, more just in our dealings with others.
Another takeaway that resonates deeply with me is the emphasis on seeking guidance. Al-Fatiha reminds us that we're not alone in this journey. We have a source of support, a guide to turn to when we're feeling lost or uncertain.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? And it's not just about seeking guidance in moments of crisis. It's about making that a constant practice, acknowledging our need for direction and seeking alignment with divine will.
And that alignment is ultimately what leads us to the straight path, the path of those who are favored, the path that leads to peace and fulfillment.
Beautifully said. Al-Fatiha is a roadmap, a compass guiding us back to our true purpose, back to the source of all that is good and true.
So as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners on the Great Indian AI podcast channel with a thought. How can you take the insights we've discussed today and weave them into the fabric of your own life? How can Al-Fatiha become more than just a prayer, but a guiding principle, a source of strength and inspiration?
That's a beautiful question to ponder, and I hope it sparks reflection and a deeper connection with this profound chapter. It's been a privilege exploring Al-Fatiha with you today.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you for sharing your insights and for making this deep dive so enriching. And to our amazing listeners on the Great Indian AI podcast channel, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. We hope you found it enlightening and inspiring.
And if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more insightful deep dives into the world of knowledge and spirituality. Until next time, may peace and blessings be upon you all.